Where things start to be interesting, or where people start looking into using Kubernetes, um, specifically, and of course we're talking here about Google Cloud, so GKE, is when you start having or start requiring things that this simple container as a service platform doesn't give you. And since we're in the age of AI, we can talk about GPUs, right? So if you need a GPU, um, like the promise of a serverless platform is very fast scaling. Very fast scaling and GPUs doesn't really go hand in hand. Just bringing up a Linux node and installing NVIDIA drivers to have a GPU ready, that takes 15 minutes. I don't think anybody will be able to sell a serverless platform that scales in 15 minutes, right?
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the next episode of Cloud Commute, the podcast about cloud, Kubernetes, cloud security, cloud storage, cloud, whatever. Today with me, I have a good friend. We know also for quite a few years. I don't know. It's going to be a couple of years back. Abdel, and I don't try to pronounce your last name. I'm really sorry. Maybe you can introduce yourself real quick, like who you are, what you do, and where you come from.
Sure, Abdel is fine. Yes, Abdel Sghiouar, if you want. That's how typically people pronounce my last name. Yeah, I'm based out of Stockholm. Work for Google. I've been at the company for 10 years. I do Kubernetes stuff. I do a Kubernetes podcast, and I talk about Kubernetes and containers. I arguably do more talks about why you probably do not need any of these technologies than why you need them actually. And originally from Morocco. That's the back story. Have you made it to Devox Morocco yet?
I was supposed to go this year, but I caught COVID the week before. So
Oh yes, I remember. Oh,
yeah,
okay, okay.
yeah. No,
I
that was real unfortunate. I was so looking forward to that. I was like, no, no.
I keep promoting the conference everywhere I go, and then I forget who made it or who didn't. Okay, well, maybe 2024 it will happen.
Yes, next time,
Next
promise.
time. Good.
Like last time, I promised last time, and I still failed. All right. You said you work for Google. I think everyone knows Google, but your role is slightly different. You're not working on a specific. Well, you work on a specific product, but as you said, you're trying to tell people why not to use.
Which I don't think my manager would be very happy if he learns. That's what I do, but
All right. So tell us about it, so I can send it to him.
so yes, I so I work on GKE. So GKE is Google Kubernetes Engine, which is the managed version of Kubernetes that we do on Google Cloud. That's technically the products I work on. I think that, like, we were having this conversation. Like, I avoid being too salesy, so I don't really talk about GKE itself unless there is specific circumstances. And of course, Kubernetes itself as a platform, it's kind of more specific to like an audience. You cannot just like go to random front end conferences and start talking about Kubernetes. No one would understand whatever you're saying. But yeah, GKE is my main thing. I do a lot of networking and security within GKE. I actually started this year looking a little bit into storage and provisioning because, surprise, surprise, AI is here and people need it. And when you are doing while machine learning workloads really on anything, you need storage because these models are super huge and storage performance is important. So yeah, so that's what I do.
I think predictability is also important, right? It's important that the data model not sometimes it's not like you want it sometimes fast and you want it sometimes slow. You want it very
You want it to have
predictably
the same
fast.
speed consistently.
Yes.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it's actually interesting. I mean, beside the products itself, it's interesting. A lot of these AI companies that came to the market in the last, I'd say, year and a half, they basically just use Kubernetes. I mean, ChatGPT is trained on Kubernetes, right? It's like, it sounds like, oh yeah, I just need nodes with GPU, Kubernetes, boom.
And it to be honest, it totally makes sense, right? Because you need to have a lot of compute power. You have to scale up and down really fast depending on how much users you currently have, right? So I think anything like that with Kubernetes makes perfect sense.
Exactly, exactly.
So you mentioned you also have a podcast. Tell me about it. It's not like
Yeah.
I have listeners you don't have, but who knows?
Yeah, it's the Kubernetes podcast by Google. It's a show that's been running for almost 6 years. I think we're close to 6 years. We've been doing it for 2 years, me and my co-host.
Ah.
So me and Kathleen Fields from Seattle. It's a twice a month show. We basically invite people from different parts of the cloud native world, I would say. So we talk to maintainers, we talk to community members. We are looking into bringing some other interesting, like guests that are like one of my personal interests is basically the intersection of technology and science. And I don't know if your audience would know this, but at KubeCon in Barcelona in 2019, one of the keynotes that was actually done was done by people from CERN who came on stage and showed how they could replicate the Higgs boson experiments on Kubernetes, right? And so that was before I was a host, but we are exploring the idea now of finding um, organization that their job is not really technology, like they're doing science, but they're using Kubernetes to enable the science, and like we're talking to them. So there's quite a lot of interesting things happening. That's how we are going to be releasing very soon. But yeah, so it's 1 hour conversation. We try to do some news. We try to kind of figure out who bought who acquired who removed which version, who changed licenses in the last 2 weeks since the last episode, and then we just interview the guests. So yeah, we have that's the show essentially.
Right, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you're also writing the "What Happened in Kubernetes"
This
newsletter this week,
this week in GKE,
or
yes.
just this week in GK. Okay, no, we're
Yeah,
not talking
which is
about
not
that.
on. Okay, which is not only about GKE. So I have a newsletter on LinkedIn called "This Week is GKE" in GKE, which covers a couple of things that happened in GKE in this week, but also covers other cloud stuff.
All right, fair enough, fair enough. So you're
Yeah.
allowed to talk about that.
Yeah. That's yeah. I mean, I basically cover. It's actually interesting. It started as a conversation on Twitter. Somebody put a tweet that say this other cloud provider, without mentioning name, introduced a feature into their managed Kubernetes, and I replied saying we had this on GKE for the last 2 years. It's a feature called image streaming. It's basically a feature to speed up the image pull, right? When you are trying to like start a pod, you have the image has to be pulled very quickly, and then the person replied to me saying, "Well, you're not doing a very good job talking at it." I was like, "Well, challenge accepted. We'll solve that."
Fair enough. So
So yeah.
so I see you're not talking about other cloud providers. You're not naming people or naming things. It's like the black the person you're not talking about. Like what is it? No, not Voldemort. Is it Voldemort? I'm really bad
Well,
in Harry Potter
maybe
stuff. I'm really
maybe
bad in.
I am as bad as you are. But yes,
Okay,
it's
fair enough.
that's other cloud provider we're not talking about.
All right, the thing we're not talking about. So okay, let's dive a little bit deeper. I mean, it's a cloud podcast. So when you build an application, how would you start? Where's like the best start? Obviously, it's GKE, but
Well, I mean, actually, arguably no. So this is a very quick question. I think that I mean specifically if you're using I think that if you're using any cloud provider, going straight into Kubernetes is probably going to be frustrating because you will have to learn a bunch of things. And what have been happening through the last couple of years is that a lot of these cloud providers are just offering you a CAS, a container as a service tool, right? Fargate on AWS. I think it's called ACS, Azure Container Services on Azure, and Cloud Run on GCP, right? So you can just basically write code, put it inside the container, and then ship it to us, and then we will give you an URL and a certificate, and we'll scale it up and down for you, right? If you're just writing an app that you needed to answer a web request and scale up and down on demand, you don't need Kubernetes for this, right? Where things start to be interesting, or where people start looking into using Kubernetes specifically, and of course we're talking here about Google Cloud, so GKE, is when you start having or start requiring things that this simple container as a service platform doesn't give you. And since we're in the age of AI, we can talk about GPUs, right? So if you need a GPU, like the promise of a serverless platform is very fast scaling. Very fast scaling and GPUs doesn't really go hand in hand. Just bringing up a Linux node and installing NVIDIA drivers to have a GPU ready, that takes 15 minutes. I don't think anybody will be able to sell a serverless platform that scales in 15 minutes, right? So
It will be complicated, I guess.
it would be complicated, yeah. So that's where people go then into Kubernetes when you need those like really specific kind of more fine-tuning knobs that you can turn on and off and kind of like experiment or try things out. Um, this is what I like to call the happy path. The happy path is you start with something simple, and as your use case get more complicated, you move to something more complex. Of course, that's not how it always works, and people usually just go like head first, dive into GKE.
I'm as bad. I'm as big as Google. I need Kubernetes right now.
Sure, knock yourself down, please. It makes actually more money for cloud. Actually,
Sure.
managed Kubernetes makes more money than container as a service, technically. So whatever.
So the containerless service, just for people that may not know, I think underneath is basically also something like Kubernetes. It's just like you'll never see that it's operated by the cloud provider, whatever it is, and you basically just give them an image like run it for me.
Exactly.
Okay.
It might not. So actually, if people want to go dive into how these things are built, there is a project called Knative
Mm-hmm.
that was also released by the Kubernetes community a few years ago, and that's typically what people use to be able to give you this like serverless experience in a container format, right? So it's Kubernetes with Knative, but everything is managed by the cloud provider. And as you said, we expose just the interface that allows you to say container in, URL out.
Mm-hmm.
So
Fair. Fair. Um, so from I mean, a couple of years ago, or, well, a couple of years ago, about a decade ago, I think now, people started really going into first like VMs and doing all of that. Then we thought like, VMs are so I mean it all started with like, physical servers are it's bad
yes,
and it's so heavy. So let's use virtual machines. They're more lightweight. And then we figure out, virtual machines are still very heavy. So let's do containers. And a couple of years ago, companies started really buying into this whole container thing. I think it basically was when Kubernetes got big. I don't remember the original Google technology. Kubernetes was basically built after Borg. Was that it?
Borg, yes, correct,
Yeah,
yes. Yeah. Borg is the base,
it
yeah.
was probably borked, and that's why they
Yes.
rebuilt it.
Yes. Yes.
And we saw this like big uptake in migrations to the cloud and specifically container platforms. Do you think it has slowed down? Do you think it's still on the rise? Is it pretty much steady? How do you see that right
It's
now?
it's a very good question. I think that there are multiple ways you can answer that question. I think that um, people moving to containers is something that is probably still happening. I think that's what's happening probably is that we don't talk about it as much because so the way I like to describe this is because Kubernetes as a technology is 10 years old. It's going to be 10 years old in June, by the way. So June, I think 5th or something. Um, uh, um, yeah, June 5th, 2014 was the first pull request that pushed the first version of Kubernetes, right? Um, it's gonna be a commodity. It's becoming a commodity. It's becoming something that people don't even have to think about. And even cloud providers are making it such a way that they can give you the experience of Kubernetes, which is essentially the API. And the API of Kubernetes itself is pretty cool, right? It's like a really nice way of expressing intent as a developer. You just say, this is how my application looks like, run it for me, I don't care. Um, and so, and then on the other hand, also, this is also interesting is a lot of programming language frameworks started building into the framework
Right.
ways of going from code to containers without Docker files, right? And you're a Java developer, so you know what I'm talking about.
Yep,
Like
I know.
Jib, you can just like import the Jib plugin in Maven, and then you just like run your Maven, and then blah, you have a container, right? So you don't have to think about Docker files. You don't really have to worry about them too much. You don't even have to learn them. And so I think that the conversation is more now about kind of like cost optimization, optimizing, bin packing, rather than the simple, oh, I want to move from a VM to a container. So the conversation is shifting somewhere else because the technology itself is becoming kind of more mainstream, I guess.
So a couple of years ago, people asked me about Docker just because you mentioned Docker. And
Yeah.
They asked me what I think about Docker. And I said, well, it's the best tool we have right now. I hope it's not going to stick. That was probably a very mean way of saying. I think the technology, like the idea of containerization and the container images, is good. I don't think Docker is the best way. And you said a lot of tools actually started building their own kinds of interface. They all still use like Docker or any of the other imaging tools underneath, but they kind of trying to hide all of that from you.
Yeah, and you don't
So
even need Docker in this case, right? I mean, I think just very quickly, I'm gonna do a shameless plug here. We have an episode on the podcast where we interviewed somebody who is one of the core maintainers of Containerd, and the episode was not about Containerd. It was really about the history of containers, and I think
mhm,
it's very important to go listen to the episode because we talked about the evolution from Docker initially to the Open Container Initiative, the OCI, which is the actually standardization part,
right.
to Containerd, to all the container runtimes that exist on the market today. And I think through that history, you will be able to understand what you're exactly talking about. Like, we don't need Docker anymore. Like, you can build containers without even touching Docker, right? Um, but because I don't really like Docker personally, that's just like so. Everybody has their
I
own
think we're not
opinions.
the only ones, to be honest. Um,
Exactly.
so where I wanted to direct my my question to is that you also said you have the like things like Fargate or all of those like serverless technologies, but underneath you use Kubernetes, but it's hidden from the user. Is that the same thing?
It, I mean, yes, in the sense that yes, because Kubernetes, as then it's becoming a commodity that people shouldn't actually. To be very honest with you, and probably this is going to be. Probably people would be shocked to hear me say this. I think Kubernetes should probably have never gotten into. I mean, the fact that it became a super popular tool is a good thing because it
Mhm.
attracted a lot of interest and a lot of investments. I do not think it's something that people should learn. It's a platform. It's something you can build on top of, right? It's like, I mean, you need to run an application, go run it on top of a container as a service. Do not learn Kubernetes. Like, you don't have to, right? Like Kelsey Hightower put it once in a tweet, which is basically Kubernetes is a platform to build platforms, right? That's what it is.
Yeah, that makes sense.
You don't even need to understand how it works. So
And I think that that makes perfect sense because I from like how do you say that from a user's perspective, it the whole idea of Kubernetes was to abstract away whatever you run on. But now
yes.
there's like so many APIs in Kubernetes that abstract away Kubernetes that it's basically possible to do whatever. And I think Microsoft did a really interesting implementation on top of Hyper-V, which it uses micro VMs, whatever they call those things,
Oh
like
yes, 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 yes,
the
yes.
shared kernel kind of stuff, which is kind of the same idea as a container.
Yeah, I
But
think it's based on kata containers. Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
right, but it's interesting because they still put the Kubernetes APIs on top or the Kubernetes implementation on top, making it look like exactly like a Linux container, which is really cool.
Yeah.
Um, anyway, what do you think is like, or what will be the next big thing for the cloud? What is the trend that is upcoming? You already mentioned AI, so that is out of the.
That's a very big one, right? um, it's actually funny because I am so I'm in Berlin this week. I was chatting with some we're here for like a conference, and we were chatting with some of the colleagues, and and the joke I was making was like, next time I go on stage onto a big conference, if there are people talking about AI at the same conference, I will go on stage and go like, okay, people talked about AI. Now let's talk about the things that actually matter. Let's talk about the thing that people are using and making money from. Like, let's stop wishful thinking, right? um, I think so. Okay, Kubernetes for AI is big. That's gonna be around. AI is not gonna disappear. It's gonna be big. I think we're in the phase where we're discovering what people can do with it.
Mhm.
So I think it's super exciting time to be alive. I think, in my opinion, there's like a shift in our field that lots of people don't get to experience. I think the last time such a shift happened in our field was people moving from mainframes to pizza box servers. So, and we're living through,
You had to mention the mainframe.
of course, and we're living through the same thing. So anyway, I think that's what's gonna happen. So this security remains a big problem across the board for everything: access security, management, identity, software security. You're a developer, you know what I'm talking about. People pulling random dependencies from the internet without knowing where they're coming from. People pull in containers from Docker Hub without knowing who built them or how they were built. Zero ways of establishing trust, like all that stuff.
Yep.
So that's gonna remain like not a problem, I would say, but it's gonna remain a theme that we're gonna hear about over and over again, and we have to solve this eventually. I think the other thing would be just basically cost saving, because we live in an interesting world where everybody cares about cost saving. So cost optimization, bin packing, making sure you get the most out of your buck that you're paying to your cloud provider. And I think that the cloud native ecosystem enabled a lot of people to go do some super niche solutions. And I think we're gonna get to a stage now where all these companies doing super niche solutions will be filtered out in a way that only those that have really, really interesting things that solve real problems, not made up problems, will remain on the market.
Yeah,
So I think
that
that's
makes
basically
sense. Yeah, that
yeah,
makes sense. Like only the companies stick that really have a solution that solves something and not just being around.
exactly. Which
And I
this is
and
how
I
it felt in 2023 at least.
yeah, and I think that ethics will also play a big part in the whole AI. Well, in the next decade of AI, I think we need to be really careful what we do. The technology makes big steps, but we also see like all of the downsides already. The
Yes.
main industry that is always on the forefront of every new technology already is there, and they're misusing it for a lot of really stupid things. But it is what it is. Because we're already running out of time. 20 minutes is like so super short. Your favorite stack right now?
Yeah, you asked me that question. Still unchanged. Go as a backend technology. I don't do a lot of front end, so I don't have a favorite stack in that space. Mac for development, Visual Studio Code, VSS for coding. I started dabbling into IntelliJ very recently. I kind of like it actually. Because I'm not a Java developer, so I don't really I never had a need for it, but I'm just experimenting. And so go for the backend. I think it's just backend. I only do backend. So go. Yes, probably I should have.
That makes sense. I mean, Go and me is like a love-hate relationship. I wouldn't say Go is like a perfect language, but
It's
it's
not.
like super efficient for microservices. When you write microservice, like all of the integration of like Let's Encrypt or the Acme protocol, all that kind of stuff. It's literally you just dump it down and it works. And that was a first for me, coming from the
Yeah.
Java world.
Oh
Making
yeah.
something which is, I mean, I wouldn't say. I mean, a lot of people claim that Java is like very like verbose. I don't think that. I think Java was always meant to be more readable than writable, which is, from my perspective, a good thing. And I sometimes think Go did some things at least wrong. But it's much more complicated because Java is coming from a very different direction. If you want to write something really small, and you hinted at like the frameworks like Quarkus and stuff, but Go all just has that. They build
Yes.
it with the idea of the standard library should be pretty much everything you need for a microservice, and it basically is.
Exactly.
All right. We're recording that the week before KubeCon. KubeCon Europe. Will I see you next week?
Yes, I'm gonna be at KubeCon. I'm gonna speak at Cloud Native Rejects on the weekend, and I'll be at KubeCon the whole week.
All right. So if that comes out next Friday, I think, and you hear that, and you're still at KubeCon, come see us.
Yes, I'm gonna be at the booth a lot of times, but you will be able to see me. I am a tall, brown person with curly hair. So I don't know how many people like me will be there, and I speak very loud, so you'll be able to
That's
both hear me and see me.
that's fair. All right. Thank you, Abdel. Thank you for being here. I really appreciated the session. It was a good chat. I love that.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me, Chris.
All right. Next week, next episode. And I hope you're listening in again. Thank you very much.